Thank you for tuning in. This is Knife Reviews, and I'm your host, Joshua Hightower. My partner, Evan Hightower, is running around. Go ahead and say hi.
Hi!
We really do appreciate being here. We wanted to go over another knife today that is called the Bush Knife by Jeff White. This is a 10-inch overall knife, a 5-inch cutting blade, comes in a convex grind with 1095 high carbon steel, curly maple handles, full tang design, and it has a really nice hammer finish on it. It gives it a very rustic feel, kind of an original knife kind of feel. We have 5 classifications that we want this knife to perform in: batoning and chopping, cutting, feather sticking, spine scraping, and ferrule rod usage. We want to start with chopping and see how it does. Chopping pretty good. Now we want to try a little bit of that red cedar, which is a little bit harder than the pine we just did. This is about 1.5 inch diameter. So it chopped through that pretty well. There are no nicks or dings in the blade. It made it through the chopping pretty easily. On every knife, you want to make sure that you have good edge retention after chopping, so that you can go in and keep processing without having to stop and sharpen it up or worry about your knife getting dull. The next thing you want to be able to do after you get done chopping down a limb off the tree or whatever you have, you might need to baton that piece of wood down into smaller portions that you can work with to process a little bit further. This is just another piece of red cedar. Because this is a 5-inch blade, you're able to get some of the thicker stuff and baton through that. Once you baton that, you want to be able to process it down into smaller pieces. It's done a pretty good job of batoning and chopping. And as before, it's able to keep that edge pretty sharp, so we don't have to worry about maintaining the knife. One of the first things that I noticed about this knife while we were batoning, I found that there's a certain weight distribution issue that bothers me about it. It feels like as I'm chopping that the weight of this knife is very far forward, and what that seems to do, that it pushes the knife forward where it might feel like it's chopping really heavy, but what it's doing is pulling that knife out of your hand a little bit, so you're having to choke up to keep a stronger grip on it. And what that does is it creates a hot spot on the palm of your hand where you might develop a blister. It has chopped and it has batoned really well, but I am noticing that that weight distribution issue is putting it off balance. It feels very, very top heavy. That might complement some people's style with a knife, but for me, it feels like the knife is off balance. So for the chopping batoning portion, it did chop and baton well, but the weight issue bothers me quite a bit right now. I'm going to give this a 7 out of a 10 on batoning and chopping. The next classification that we want to go over for the Bush Knife by Jeff White is cutting. That includes slicing, cutting, processing wood, processing game, whatever you need around the camp or in the woods, that knife needs to be able to do it. What I'm noticing right off the bat is that, as you can see where the knife handle flares out at the bottom, it feels like it's pushing my hand up into the knife. Now it does have this space right here so you can choke up on it, but it makes it a little bit uncomfortable if I just want to keep back on the handle to cut down here. Now, it's cutting very nice. Very nice cuts. It's slicing right through it. I'm not having to put much effort into it, but what it is doing is causing me to have to put extra effort into it. It's taken out some big hunks of wood. You're able with this knife to take out some really good sized chunks of wood. And for me, the fewer strokes you have to make with a knife means the less work you have to do. And I'm all about doing the least amount of work to getting that warm fire going. So the less work I have to do, the happier I am with the knife. So this thing is cutting right through this wood. This is hardwood and it's cutting right through it like you would want a good quality knife to do. So before, we're making big, heavy cuts to get through that wood as quickly as possible, to process it down in tinder or other types of fuel for my fire. But cutting is not just about the heart of the knife. Cutting is about being able to use the entire edge of the knife equally to make different types of cuts. So can you use the tip of your knife to make these nice little curls off of it? And this actually is doing a very good job. I think that convex edge is just pushing that sliver of wood right off of it. So you're able to process this down as fine as you need it. You also want to be able to, along with cutting, be able to notch your wood to create tent stakes for shelter or to tie up game into the trees to keep it away from the bears and cougars at night, and you need to keep that rope and anchor it down in the ground. Your knife has to be agile enough to be able to cut any of the kind of cuts you need to process the wood down, process the game, but also be able to make these a little bit more intricate cuts for wedging. So if I needed to use this as a tent stake, tie off my 550 cord or rope, whatever I got, tie it up on that. Drive it into the ground, and I've got my tent stake cut from my knife. The only issue I've found while cutting with this knife, and albeit the same issue I had with batoning and chopping, was that the weight distribution of this knife once again puts it so far forward, you're having to compensate for that far forward weight by choking up a little bit higher on the knife, and then the handle is kind of funneling this edge downward so that your knife is giving you a hot spot on your palm. Now it may be my hands, but what I found is that it is definitely awkward. It's not too awkward where I wouldn't want to use the knife, but it's definitely something that you're going to have to look out for. So for cutting, we're going to give this a 7 out of a 10 on the scale. The next thing that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to scrape with the spine of this knife. So we're going to use that 90-degree spine and see if we can get a little bit of bark off it. There's not much on this cedar, but the trademark of a good spine is you're able to get material off of this even when there's not much there. You need to use all the resources that you have available to you. What I'm finding is that it's ripping right through the bark. It's going right down into the inner bark, and it's taking up all of the nice fine shavings that I need. It's definitely processing enough bark that I'll be able to have pretty decent tinder in marginal conditions where everything out here has been rained on and snowed on for a couple of weeks, so everything is wet. So for minimal effort with scraping on my spine, I'm able to get some pretty good tinder. I'm definitely going to be able to start a fire with that. The next task you want to be able to do with scraping with that 90-degree spine, and we want to be able to scrape off enough that we can add it to our bird's nest to give ourselves a better chance at starting that fire. What I'm noticing right off the back is that it's biting deep into the wood, and it's giving me some pretty decent shavings. So once again, for minimal effort on this 90-degree spine, I'm able to get a lot of really good fine shavings off of a piece of wood, some good tinder for some bark off the cedar. Processing has not caused any issue. So for shaving, I found that I'm able to create optimal conditions to make a good bird's nest, to create good tinder, to affect good fire making conditions. So I'm able to give this a 10 out of 10 on scraping because I really believe that this spine has been tempered in a way that it's very, very hard, but able to affect scraping and tinder making in an optimal condition. The next thing that we want to go over is feathers. You may need a little bit smaller wood that once you've caught your bird's nest on fire, you may need some extender. So are we able to make those really fine, precise cuts with as little force as possible? And what I'm finding is that this is definitely able to create those feather sticks that you need as a fire extender. So you have a little bit more control over it. So for feather sticking, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. One knock off of it is that weight distribution. The last thing that we want to go over with this knife, the bush knife by Jeff White, is ferro rod usage. So for this, we're just going to go at it and see what it can do. If for some reason you needed to scrape towards the tip, you're able to get sparks up there. Towards the middle, you're getting sparks. Down towards your handle is where you're getting the money sparks at. So, is the knife able to spark a fire with just your ferro rod? Simple answer is yes. I'm able to affect fire with my ferro rod. So for ferro rod uses, we're going to give this a 10 out of 10. Very, very competent knife. My overall impression of this knife is pretty high. The price point for this knife is $65, I think. And in that range, you're going to be hard pressed to find a knife that performs better than this one does. Obviously, we had the issue with the weight distribution. Yeah. Other than that, I've been very, very impressed with the knife. Once again, 1095 high carbon. Got a very nice hammer finish on it. It's actually not nearly as heavy as you would think looking at this knife. It's very, very light, comparatively speaking to other knives this size. I think this is definitely one that I'm going to keep. Sometimes after I get done doing a review with a knife, I'll trade it off or send it back to the maker. This one I bought myself. I'm definitely going to keep it. It's something that I can throw in my pack, I can throw in my truck, I can throw it in my horse pack. I can take it anywhere with me and I'm not going to have to worry. Once again, my name is Joshua Hightower. We appreciate you, and God bless. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.